What's up, everybody? FTWitachi here. You know what it is. Thank you all very much for tuning in to another guide, another video, and another episode at youtube.com/FTWitachi plays, where today we're going to be covering over Soulbinds with the new patch 9.0.5. Currently working on getting the rest of these videos out as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for the support on our Demonology Warlock guide that has been updated for patch 9.0.5. Same goes for Affliction and Destruction, and we've also released a video out for Covenant, so thank you very much for the support on that. Positive, negative feedback, everything, post it down below in the comment section, and I'll go ahead and respond to it, seeing as fit. I most likely respond to pretty much all comments. Go ahead and like the video if you want to see some more, and of course, please go ahead and subscribe. So, what is soul binding? So for those of you that are kind of new to the game, to this patch, or just don't know what soul binding is in general for whatever reason, soul binding is a new system of progression in the Shadowlands expansion in which players who join a covenant, which we've already gone over in another guide, will be able to bind themselves to one of its members. There's 3 members for each covenant. There's a total of 4 covenants, meaning there's 12 total members that you can soul bind to, but again, once you select a covenant, you only have a choice of 3. Sharing some of their powers through an artifact-like talent tree, each of the different covenants have 3 options to choose from, with each soulbind offering different bonuses for the total of 12 different trees of progression across the 4 covenants. Conduits add further customization, which we'll be going over into the next video, and then the last video we'll be covering is legendaries or legendary powers. So how this video is going to work, we're going to be going over each and every single member, starting off with the Kyrian. We're going to go over every single member, giving you guys the best talent tree possible from a Warlock's perspective. We've already gone over again which covenants are best for each spec, so if you haven't checked that video out, I strongly suggest you do so in a World of Warcraft Shadowlands playlist. That'll kind of give you guys an idea on which covenant to look into, and then of course which soulbinds to go ahead and look into. But after we've gone over all 12 members and which talent tree or talent options you should go ahead and select from those given members, we'll go ahead and at the end of the video, I'll go ahead and do a little bit of a mini rundown on your covenant options as well. Not going into deep details, but saying which covenant's the best, which soulbind will be the best, and so on and so forth, with all 12 for each spec. So, without further ado, let's get into the soulbinds. Alright, so the first option we're going to be going over is Kyrian's own Pelagos. We're going to be bypassing the potency, finesse, and endurance conduit slots. And what I mean by that is we're not going to go into deep details on which conduits to go ahead and put into these slots. We'll be doing that in a separate video, which we'll be going over which are the best conduit options for Warlocks for all 3 specs. So stay tuned for that video. I'm just going to be giving you guys the rundown from top to bottom on which options are kind of like mandatory to go ahead and choose from, and which options you want to go with. But just to give you a quick rundown before we get into the first option or the first soulbind, a potency conduit, you're going to notice that there's double swords in that icon, and what that means is it's going to affect your damaging abilities. It's going to increase your damage in some way, shape, or form. You'll also notice that there's another conduit called endurance that has a shield option through it. Basically that's going to affect your healing or defensive abilities. And then of course the lightning bolt is called the finesse option. This is where everything just gets a little bit niche. Has nothing, it's not really a amazing perk, but for example for Warlocks you get speed increases with your teleportations, Eye of Kilrog gets a buff, so on and so forth, so basically stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead, start off with your boy, Pelagos himself. I am not going to be going into deep details on every single ability. I did this in the first ever Shadowlands guide for Soulbinds. Because this is the second patch and not much has changed with Soulbinds, I'm just going to go ahead and give you guys the quickest rundown that you possibly can when it comes to the Soulbinds. So first option you're going to be going with is Combat Meditation. It is pretty much a given, and it is the first option of choice. Now when it comes to the second row, you're going to want to go with the Potency Conduit over an Endurance and a Finesse Conduit, because again, we are a Warlock, and of course we want to go ahead and increase our damage as much as possible. So the best conduit choices for us is going to be Potency, so I strongly suggest you go ahead and select the leftmost option. That's going to be giving us into Focusing Mantra. Defeating an enemy lowers the cooldown of your File of Serenity by 1 second, which is beneficial. You also have Road of Trials, which you could have gotten from the Endurance conduit slot, which is defeating an enemy grants you 10% movement speed for 20 seconds. Its effect is increased if defeating a powerful enemy, which is a lot better than Focusing Mantra, but it is not better when combining that with a defensive conduit or a healing conduit. File of Patience is the other one that we could have gotten, which is File of Serenity heals you for 35% additional health, but all of its healing is done over 10 seconds, which is great as well. But again, you're teaming that up with a Finesse Conduit, so that's why I strongly suggest you go with the Potency Conduit into Focusing Mantra. We're now forced into an Endurance Conduit, and you have either choice of Bond of Friendship or Cleansed Vestments. None of these affect you in any way, shape, or form. Whichever one is going to affect you. For example, you could be a tailor and an enchanter, and you're getting cloth and enchanting materials from Cleansed Vestments, and that's a great way for you to go ahead and get more materials for your professions, so on and so forth. These are just basically niche abilities, soulbind abilities from Pelagos. So go ahead and select whichever one. Next up is a Potency Conduit, which is a great benefit. And then here is where I strongly suggest you, if you are doing PvP content, to go with the Endurance Conduit, because you could get a lot more benefits than the Finesse option. And even in PvE, you're going to get more benefits from the Endurance Conduit than the Finesse option. However, it doesn't really matter when it comes to PvE content, which conduit you select out of here. But I do strongly suggest, if doing PvP content, you select one of your Endurance options. Again, we'll be getting into which conduits you should select in another video. And then, of course, that leads us last into Let Go of the Past. Next up is Clea. Starting off with Valiant Strikes, of course, given option. It's the first soulbind ability that she gives you. Next up, you only have two conduit choices to choose from, which is Potency and Endurance. Of course, we're going to want to go ahead and stick with that Potency conduit option, which would lead us into Mentorship. While above 90% health, you increase nearby party members' maximum health by 5%, which is really nice. The other option would have been Ascendant File. File of Serenity renders you immune to curses, diseases, poisons, and bleed effects for 8 seconds, which is great for PvP type of content. But again, teaming that up with an Endurance Conduit, I strongly suggest Potency into Mentorship, leading us into a Finesse Conduit. These two soulbind abilities, whichever one you prefer, neither are going to affect you in any way, shape, or form. They're very niche. Cleansing Rites, after 5 seconds out of combat, you gain a shield for 10% of your maximum health. That's the option I would go with. But while above 90% health, your mounted movement speed is increased by 10% if you ever want that as well. Next up, you have an Endurance Conduit option. And then last but not least, you're going to go ahead and select the Potency Conduit into Bearer's Pursuit, which is the better option anyways over Pointed Courage as well as Resonant Accolades. Again, you're also taking advantage of the Potency Conduit. And last but not least, the final soulbind for the Kyrian is Forge Light himself. Starting off with Bronze Call to Action, leading us into the Potency Conduit, giving us Forge Light Filter. When reduced below 35% health, your File of Serenity automatically heals you and consumes a charge. Other option would have been Charged Additive. File of Serenity also knocks nearby enemies away from you. Again, pretty much only nice in PvP combat. Of course, in open world combat as well. But again, you as a Warlock, you want to take advantage of the Potency Conduit, leading us into Forge Light Filter. Next up, you got to select a Finesse Conduit. Here, you got two soulbind abilities, which you can choose either or. Resilient Plumage basically reduces fall damage. And then, of course, you got Regenerating Materials, casting or receiving healing, has a chance to improve the remaining durability of your armor, which is very, very nice as well, which is one I would definitely go with. Next up, you got an Endurance Conduit option, leading us into a Potency Conduit option, and last but not least, Soul Steel Clamps after 5 seconds standing still. Incoming stun and incapacitating durations are reduced by 30%. Last 5 seconds when you start moving. When it comes to Forge Light, you'll see towards the end of this video, he's not the best option to choose from when it comes to your Soulbinds, because his abilities aren't really great for Warlocks in general. But that is the path that you will be taking if you were to select Forge Light. But again, stay tuned towards the end of the video where we'll be going over which of these three options would be best if you were to go ahead and dive on in to the Kyrian Covenant. Next up, getting into the Night Fae, we've got Naya starting off with Grove Invigoration, leading us into a Potency Conduit within Run Without Tiring. While in Soul Shape, you regenerate 5% of your maximum health every 3 seconds. You also had the ability to go into an Endurance, which would give you Stay on the Move. Soul Shape's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds, and defeating an enemy reduces Soul Shape's cooldown by 1 second. Either or are very nice abilities to have. So of course, you're going to want to go ahead and take the Potency Conduit route. Leading us into a Finesse Conduit. Now, you have two Swift Patrol or Nature's Splendor. You have a chance to obtain leather meat and fish when you kill an enemy, or you can take swift patrol. Movement speed increases by 20% for 2 minutes. Again, these are very niche soulbind abilities, so select whichever one you find that's going to benefit you the most. Leading you into an endurance conduit, leading you into a potency conduit, and last but not least, Naya's tools, which is poison. Your interrupts apply Naya's paralytic poison to your target, dealing nature damage over 30 seconds. Targets with Naya's paralytic poison take an additional nature damage if interrupted once more as well. You also had the options of going into Endurance, Naya's tools, burrs. Your damaging attacks and spells have a chance to toss Naya's spiked burrs under your target. The burrs latch onto the first enemy to cross them, reducing movement speed by 20% and inflicting nature damage over 6 seconds. Or Naya's tools, which is herbs. Healing spells and abilities have a chance to apply Naya's invigorating herbs, increasing the target's haste by 5% for 10 seconds. So we have great options to choose here. I'm being very, very sarcastic. All three of these are absolutely pretty much shit. But Naya's tools, poison is probably your best bet, because again, these potency conduits, man, they're next freaking level. And I'm not exaggerating on that one. You're going to want to take as many potency conduit slots as you possibly can, which is going to force lead you into Naya's tools, poison. So, one of my favorite soulbinds in the game, sadly my Warlock's not Night Fae, but we got Dreamweaver here. We got Pod Tender, which is the first ability you're going to be given, leading you into an endurance or a finesse conduit. I strongly suggest going endurance in most cases, especially in PvP, and then that leads you into a potency conduit into 3 options. Empowered Chrysalis is pretty much useless for us, and it does lead you into a finesse conduit, so I don't suggest that at all. I'd rather Social Butterfly over Soothing Voice any day. However, Soothing Voice leads you into the potency conduit, and again, like I've said, the potency conduits are kind of mandatory, so I strongly suggest going Soothing Voice into the potency conduit, leading you into the endurance conduit. Now you have one of 2 options down here: Somnambulist or Fairy Dust. Fairy Dust basically gives you a slow fall, and Somnambulist basically gives you increased movement speed in an arrested area. Choose either or, it doesn't matter, they're both very niche. I went with Somnambulist, and then that leads you into the last, which is Field of Blossoms. The final of the Night Fae, leading you off with Wild Hunt Tactics into a potency conduit. That's going to give you Horn of the Wild Hunt, which Soul Shape increases movement speed of allies within 40 yards by 10%. Or you could have gone the endurance route into Wild Hunt's Charge. While out of combat, your Soul Shape's teleport becomes a charge, stunning your target for 5 seconds and ending your Soul Shape. I strongly suggest going with Horn of the Wild Hunt because Wild Hunt's Charge isn't that great or that beneficial for us, which is of course Horn of the Wild Hunt is going to give you the potency conduit option as well. That leading you into a finesse conduit and selecting either one of these 2 niche soulbind abilities. Get in formation, mounted movement speed is increased by 5% with allies behind you within 40 yards, gain this benefit. And then of course, Vorkai Sharpening Techniques, your weapon basically takes no durability damage. Choose either or, they're very niche. Of course, you're going to be led into an endurance conduit, potency conduit, and last but not least, face your foes. When in front of your target, your spells and abilities decrease the damage they inflict on you by 3% for 2 seconds, which is mainly very beneficial in PvP combat. But again, First Strike and Hold the Line, they don't benefit you enough to want to not take the potency conduit. So I strongly suggest going potency into face your foes. Next up, the third Covenant, Venthyr, starting off with Nausea the Mistblade. We got Thrill Seeker here with the first ability, leading us into a potency conduit and Agent of Chaos. Dwarf Shadows disorients all nearby enemies at your target location for 6 seconds when you appear. Or you could have gotten Fancy Footwork. Dwarf Shadows increases movement speed by 40%, but again, that doesn't ward off not selecting a potency conduit. So you get to go potency into Agent of Chaos, leading you into a finesse conduit, leading you into Friends in Low Places, leading you into an endurance conduit, and of course potency into Familiar Predicaments. The duration of incoming interrupts, snares, and root effects are reduced by 25%. Again, another good ability for PvP combat. Exacting Preparation and Dauntless Duelist don't benefit enough to not select the potency conduit. So you get to go potency into Familiar Predicaments. Next up, we got Theotar himself, starting off with Soothing Shade. We now have an endurance and a finesse, the 2 worst conduit options for Warlock. Sadly, they're not potency. Also, leading us into Leisurely Gate, Door of Shadows has 2 charges, but its cooldown is increased by 30 seconds. Or Watch the Shoes, Door of Shadows frees you from roots and snares. Now, when it comes to this, select either the Endurance or the Finesse, whichever one you would much rather prefer, which is Watch the Shoes and Leisurely Gate. If you're doing PvP content, I strongly suggest Endurance into the Watch the Shoes. Otherwise, if you really want Leisurely Gate and you're not doing too much PvP content, you can do Finesse into Leisurely Gate. None of these 4 or these top 2 rows are going to affect your PvE content or damage in much any other way possible. So, again, Endurance into Watch the Shoes for PvP. Otherwise, you can, if you want, go ahead and do Finesse into Leisurely Gate, leading you into the first Potency Conduit option. Next up, 2 niche abilities, pretty much again. Life of the Party. During the Ember Court, your guests gain additional happiness. Otherwise, you could go Exquisite Ingredients to basically have a chance to get herbs and beverages when you kill an enemy, yielding experience or honor. Of course, leading you into an Endurance Conduit, into a Potency Conduit, into Token of Appreciation. Grant a shield that absorbs damage to allies who aid you with healing and beneficial magical effects. You will only shield each ally once every 20 seconds. Refined Palate, as well as Wasteland Propriety. They don't really, they're better than Token of Appreciation, I will say that, but they don't, again, as always, I've said this freaking every time, they don't warrant enough to not select the Potency Conduit. So, Potency into Token of Appreciation. And last but not least, for the Venthyr, you got General Draven. He's kind of one of my favorite options for Venthyr, but he's not the best, I'll tell you that much. Starting off with Service in Stone, leading you into an Endurance or Finesse Conduit option. Now, I usually say for PvP, you're going to want to go Endurance. However, for this one, I strongly suggest just choosing the Finesse option in pretty much all situations, because Move as 1 isn't that great. It is, but it isn't. It requires stuff to be great. When a nearby ally gains temporary increased movement speed, you also gain the benefit up to 30% for 8 seconds. Now, Enduring Gloom, Door of Shadows grants you a shield that absorbs damage equal to 50% of your maximum health. I'd rather that than a possible chance at moving as 1. And also, you can get some decent conduits with Finesse. Leading you into a Potency Conduit option. These 2 are both niche. Equipment takes 50% less durability with Unbreakable Body, or Expedition Leader. It's a much better effect than Unbreakable Body. However, if you don't have that much gold, I strongly suggest Unbreakable Body. Leading you into an Endurance Conduit, a Potency Conduit, and of course Hold Your Ground. Standing still for 4 seconds grants you 10% increased stamina. Increased healing done by 4%, and this effect persists for 6 seconds after you start moving. You could have gone with Superior Tactics, which successfully interrupting an enemy or dispelling an ally increases your crit, which of course we'd rather that than stamina and healing, but again, that is pretty much useless compared to an actual Potency Conduit. And then of course Built for War, while above 80% health, 1% primary set every 3 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. If you fall under below 50% health, this effect is lost. You basically just get 4% into your primary stat. Again, that still does not outweigh what you can get from the Potency Conduit, leading you into Hold Your Ground. And last but not least, the Necro Lords themselves, Plague Deviser Merileth, starting off with Volatile Solvent, leading you into the 1 of 3 options, Potency, Endurance, and Finesse. I strongly suggest you go with the Potency option, leading you into Ooze's Frictionless Coating. When reduced below 50% health, Ooze curses over you, granting you a shield for 15% of your maximum health for 10 seconds. May only occur once every 30 seconds. You could have gone with Travel with Bloop. While standing still, you slowly build stacks of Bloop's Wonderlust. That's 5 stacks. Your movement speed is increased. Again, that doesn't really affect your damage. And then the other one was Plaguey's Preemptive Strike. Your first strike or spell cast on an enemy increases damage done to them by 10% for 10 seconds. That is great, but doesn't outweigh the option of a Potency Conduit into Ooze's Frictionless Coating. Next up, you got an Endurance slot, leading you into 2 niche abilities. 1, Kevin's Keyring, allows opening of locks that require up to 60 skill once every 12 hours. And the other one is Plagueborn's Cleansing Slime. Defeating enemies has a chance to deploy a Plagueborn Cleansing Slime, which improves the remaining durability of your armor. Leading you into a Potency Conduit, either an Endurance or Finesse. Strongly suggest Endurance for PvP, or the Finesse option if you just don't want to do any PvP at all, and you want to go ahead and utilize one of the Finesse Conduits. And leading you into your Ultimate form. Next up, we've got Ameni. Starting off by lead by example into a Potency Conduit, giving you Ameni's Magnificent Skin. Fleshcraft increases maximum health by 5% for 30 seconds. Could have gone with Endurance into Ameni's Ambulatory Flesh. You may channel Fleshcraft while moving. However, you get much more benefits from Ameni's Magnificent Skin, of course, because of a Potency Conduit. Leading you into the Finesse Conduit. These two niche Soulbind abilities. Hearth Kidney Stone is an extra Hearthstone, pretty much, and you can put it wherever you want. And of course, Cartilaginous Legs. After taking falling damage, your health loss becomes a shield lasting 30 seconds. I absolutely love Hearth Kidney Stone. It's one of the coolest niche Soulbind abilities that you can get. Leading you into an Endurance Conduit, a Potency Conduit, and Gristled Toes. Movement speed increased by 3% for every nearby enemy, up to 15%. Of course, you could have gone Gnashing Chompers as well as Sulfuric Emission. However, that Potency Conduit outweighs both, leading you into Gristled Toes as your final option. And the last and final Soulbind from the Necrolord is Bonesmith Hirmir. You got Forge-Born Reveries as your first Soulbind ability, leading you into a Potency Conduit, giving you Resourceful Fleshcrafting. Fleshcraft's passive effect reduces the cooldown by an additional 1 second when it consumes a corpse. Serrated Spalders inflicts shadow damage to your attackers over 5 seconds when hit at melee range. Is a much better option than Resourceful Fleshcrafting. As always, I've said this every other time, you're not going to select that, sadly, because you have a Potency Conduit option, which is going to force you into Resourceful Fleshcrafting. So, again, you're going to stay to the left-hand side, leading you into a Finesse Conduit slot. You got one of two niche abilities. One is Bonesmith Satchel, which basically gives you ores and gems when killing an enemy that yields experience or honor, and it's a chance, by the way. And Reforged Spurs, mounted movement speed is increased by 5%. If attacked while mounted, mounted movement speed is increased by an additional 10% for 30 seconds. I would strongly suggest Runeforged Spurs. Leading you into an Endurance Conduit slot, a Potency Conduit slot, and last but not least, Hilimir's Arsenal Gore Stompers. Damaging or healing a target below 35% grants you 35% increased movement speed for 5 seconds. After you start moving, may only occur once per minute. Could have gone with Morrow Gemstone. After landing 10 crits, you gain 18% increased chance to crit for 10 seconds. May only occur once every 60 seconds. It's a very poor ability overall. And then last but not least, Ravenous Pendant. Defeating an enemy restores 3% of your maximum health every 6 seconds for 6 seconds. Stacking up to 5 times, adding stacks refreshes the duration. So again, pretty much these bottom two from the Endurance and the Finesse options aren't really that beneficial. So again, I strongly suggest going Potency into Hirimir's Arsenal Gore Stompers. So now to recap which Soulbind choice and option is best for you depending on which spec you're playing, whether that be Demonology, Destruction, and or Affliction, and we will be going in that order. We will be covering all 12 Soulbinds, so that's 3 from each of the 4 covenants. I will give you a quick rundown on which covenants I said were best in the covenant video, so you can kind of get an idea on which Soulbinds you will be looking into. Starting off with Demonology Warlocks. The best covenant of choice was Necrolord, leading it to number 2, Night Fae, to number 3, Kyrian, and to number 4, Venthyr. So starting off with the Demonology Warlocks with Necrolords, you would be going with Ameni into Plague, and then last but not least would be Bonesmith. For the Night Fae option as a Demonology Warlock, you would be going into Naya, to either Dreamreaver, into Korain. For the Kyrian option, you'll be going Pelagos at number 1, Clea at number 2, Forgelight at number 3, and then of course for the Venthyr option, because this is the worst covenant for a Demonology Warlock, you'll be going Nausea at your number 1 Soulbind option, Theo at number 2, and General at number 3. Next up, we got Destruction Warlocks, with the Covenant options of Night Fae being your best, Necrolord being number 2, Kyrian being number 3, and Venthyr being number 4. So the best Soulbind for the Night Fae Destruction Warlock setup was Naya, leading you into number 2 was Dreamweaver, and at number 3, Korain. For the Necrolord Destruction option, you were given Ameni at number 1, Plague at number 2, and Bonesmith at number 3. For the Kyrian option for Destruction Warlock, Pelagos at 1, Clea at 2, Forgelight at 3. And of course, last but not least, you had for the Venthyr Destruction Warlocks, Nausea at number 1, Theo at number 2, and General at number 3. And of course, for the final spec, Affliction Warlocks, you have the Night Fae as your best Covenant option, with Kyrian, then Necrolord, then Venthyr. For the Affliction Warlocks in a Night Fae perspective, your best Soulbind option was Naya, then Dreamweaver, then Korain. For the Kyrian option, you have Pelagos, Clea, then Forgelight. For the Necrolord, you have Ameni, Plague, then Bonesmith, and then at the last option for the Affliction Warlocks, you had the Venthyr. You'll be given at your best Soulbind option, Nausea, Theo, and then General. Alrighty, everybody. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Again, we got 2 more guides to get released to you guys as quickly as possible. That being Conduits and that being Legendary Powers. So please stay tuned. Please go ahead and subscribe, stay tuned, and help us out by reaching more targeted goals from the subscriber numbers, from viewer numbers, and of course, check out all of the links down below. Follow us on Twitch, check us out on social media, so on and so forth. And again, don't be afraid to ask you anything in the comment section down below. Stay tuned for some more hard-hitting guides when we get into deep details on which spec is the best, or which talent options are the best, for Demonology Warlocks in dueling, in 3s, in rated battlegrounds, in a PvE situation. I'll be breaking it down a little bit better in specific guides, so stay tuned for that. However, I wanted to get the overall guides completed as quickly as we possibly could. So stay tuned, peace out everybody, and have a wonderful day.